Japan will, by the end of sort of at its zenith, its empire will encompass all of these red spaces. So Japan becomes a major imperial power. It becomes transoceanic imperial power, and this really takes shape and place and gets going during the Meiji period. So I want to step back a little bit and go to the early Meiji period and talk about how this comes to pass. So we talked a bit about the fact that calling Japan a closed country, it misses some important developments, some important connections. Talked about some of the kinds of ways in which Japan was connected with Korea and China, as well as the kingdom of Ryukyu, as well as the northern territory of Ezo. These are important sort of ties that precede the Meiji period. And we talked about how that was maps. Anyway, so we also talked about the networks through a system of offering tribute that were maintained by these embassies that came from Korea and from the kingdom of Ryukyu to visit Japan on important days, like important ceremonial days, like an imperial birth or an emperor taking the throne. These things are celebrated within Japan's sort of larger sphere of influence by these kinds of embassies. And of course, the wheels are being greased as well by trade. So let's get into the Meiji period. Japan has these ties to these territories or other countries like the kingdom of Ryukyu or like Korea, and they've also seen very, very well just how much Western dominance depends upon the ability to subjugate others, to impose military and economic rule on others. So this knowledge comes sort of more and more into to factor more into decisions as we get in the 1870s. One of the larger issues facing the Meiji government is that the samurai class has no more job to do. So we see the abolition of the samurai class in 1871. And between 71 and 76, we see the removal of samurai's right to wear swords, the removal of the top knot. All these things are going to happen within about 5 years, so that by 77 there is no more samurai class. There's no more military official class. But there are many samurai, right? There are over 1 million samurai who are still around. So one of the ways in which this problem is addressed is, first of all, by recognizing that they are not being used or being able to use their skills, that they are restless. There are a lot of fighting also among samurai, just a lot of bar fights. Just not a nice moment for the samurai class as their rights are taken away and nothing really comes to replace that. This is being carried out by men who themselves belong to the samurai class, men who themselves were really well aware of what this would mean, but hadn't really taken any steps to mitigate the impact of this loss. In 1873, so there's sort of two important incidents that I want to mention here that provide opportunity or perhaps a challenge in this context. The first is the Meiji government has different factions, right? One faction of this Meiji government is led by Saiko Takamori, who is from Satsuma domain, not daimyo, but he was, the top general amongst the imperial forces. He was the one overseeing the destruction that you guys read about in Aizu. He was a very important, right, general in that context, and he's now part of the government. He has a few different roles, But he is in favor of trying to maintain a lot of Japanese identity. He is very influenced by the Mito scholarship and this line of thinking that we discussed before. So he wants to see Japan as a country grow and become more powerful and perhaps even, confront the West. And one of the ways to do that would be to invade Korea. Korea, which Japan had already invaded before, if you'll recall, to less than successful sort of conclusions, but also as a way to avoid China or Western country taking Korea and making it, making Japan unable to access their resources. So he proposes to provoke a war with Korea, to go even in person himself, and to sort of provoke what they would then call an assassination, and this would give Japan a pretext to go and invade Korea. This seemed to him a worthy and perhaps even noble cause to die for. Making this more complicated, and part of why he thinks this will work is because when the envoys from a few slides back, the So family, if you all recall, who communicate between Japan and Korea, when they bring news of the new emperor, and they have a whole letter that reads out and explains the emperor's title and why it's important, the Korean recipients do not respond with a letter to congratulate the emperor. They basically refuse to acknowledge that there's a new emperor, so to speak, in Japan. They instead only call the emperor of China emperor. So this is it's an affront. It's a sort of a diplomatic misunderstanding, perhaps, but it also speaks to how important it was for the Meiji government to have this new emperor be seen as such, right? So Saigo Takamori's idea is to go and punish Korea for this, but to do so in a way that involves his own self-sacrifice if need be. So he tries to get several members of the government on board, and I'd say about a third of the government is open to this idea. It's also happening at the end of the period during which the Iwakura Embassy is still overseas. So the most sort of enlightened, pro-Western part of government is away, and they aren't there to stop this from happening. So it does take some time, but eventually he is unsuccessful. The return, in particular, of Okubo Toshimichi, who is also from Satsuma, his home domain, will put an end to this plot. So when Okubo comes back from the Iwakura Embassy, he rejects the plan. He says, this is not a good idea, we should not do this. He's very worried that the Western countries will retaliate or will intervene and will harm Japan. So he blocks this plan. Saigo Takamori, at this point, who is increasingly worried about what's happening to the samurai as a class, he resigns. He goes back to Kagoshima. Is there a map of that somewhere? Kagoshima, which, if you'll recall, it's the very southern tip of Kyushu is Kagoshima. Back to Shimazu, now Shimazu Prefecture, now Kagoshima Prefecture. And he opens a military school. And at this point, Kagoshima is sort of like Texas. They're thinking of maybe trying to leave the party. They've had enough. The samurai, who are very numerous in Kagoshima, are restless and unemployed, and they're increasingly seeing their rights taken away. And like Aizu before, right, this is the other of the sort of most martial culture of having of the domains. So his school is called the Shigako. He opens literally like tens of thousands of military training schools in Kagoshima, basically building his own army. With the failure of this other project, another thing comes up that he is able to help take place, and the government sort of also sees this as another, for them as well, another chance. So in 1871, some Ryukyuan sailors They sail their ships and they trade with China quite a bit and with Japan. They shipwreck on the island of Taiwan. And Taiwanese Aborigines, in other words, not Han Chinese who live on Taiwan, they massacre 60 of these Ryukyuan sailors. It happens a lot. These are unsubjugated peoples living in Taiwan who don't want foreigners to come and trade or to be there on their island. So this massacre, this happens actually quite a bit, this kind of confrontations. But now, this new thing, this new event, this new sort of context changes things quite a bit. With the attack on the Ryukyuan sailors, Japan sees an opportunity to then make this part of Japan's process of expansion. So it takes 3 years for them to decide to do anything about this, which also I think shows that it was very much strategy more than it was sort of being really angry for this. The goal was to basically claim that Ryukyu is part of Japan and to do so forcibly by going in person to punish these Taiwanese peoples. These were I think they were Pawan peoples in Taiwan. So this Pyramid expedition is led by Satsuma samurai, including the brother of Saigo Takamori, whose name was Saigo Tsugimichi. And as you can imagine, with all their modern equipment, they arrive and they are able to defeat the villagers and others in the area of Taiwan that where the shipwreck had occurred. They inform China that China has not been able to maintain peace in this part of their sort of larger sphere of influence, and that they are now satisfied. But then they also claim that those who were dead, who were killed, were actually part of Japan's empire. They belonged to Japan. So this happens in 1874, but it really is the first time that we see this effective strategy of reclaiming the dead as part of Japan as a way to then make Japan's empire grow. So this is successful. In 1879, the kingdom of Ryukyu is annexed by Japan officially in documents to China and to Korea and becomes part of Japan. It has a new name. It becomes Okinawa Prefecture. If you look at a map of Japan, I think I might have a map for you later on. I'll show you in a second. It's very, very far away from the rest of Japan, although it was tied, as we said before, right, to Kagoshima and to the Shimazu clan for a long time, right, for centuries. It was definitely its own kingdom. But this will cease to be the case in 79. The last king of Ryukyu was named Shotai, and he abdicated. In exchange, he was given Japanese a court rank, baron or I think he became a marquis in the new period system, and he was encouraged to go live in Tokyo. So he was also allowed to go home once to visit on the government's dime. Otherwise, he was forced to leave his country, right? So this is a really interesting, an early step in Japan's imperial sort of development. And to give you a sense, here's Kagoshima here, and way down here we have, as you guys recall from the map quiz, we have Okinawa, or the former kingdom of Ryukyu. So, as you can see, Satsuma keeps being sort of the thorn in the side of the Meiji government. They keep having these projects, and the Taiwan expedition actually was sort of the government throwing a bone to the Satsuma samurai so that they wouldn't rebel. It was unsuccessful though, and ultimately the Satsuma samurai do rebel. So Saigo Takamori had, as I mentioned before, left the government in protest. He was frustrated with not being listened to, with not seeing samurai being put to good use, with westernization happening at far too quick of a speed. And also he was frustrated by the fact that many of the samurai from his domain, they were not actually able to have a role in the new government. Although he did have a role, he was not the person who had the most authority. So he begins with an idea to lead troops to go ask the new Meiji government, at this point it's almost a decade old, some questions about how things are being done, about process, right? As he goes, he brings 40,000 troops, and he refuses to bring other domains' troops into his corps of soldiers. So these are almost all his students or samurai from Satsuma domain. That's part of why it was not a bigger uprising. And they march from Kagoshima north, which is, it's very far, hoping to get to Tokyo, but they are stopped in Kumamoto. Is that on the map? Yeah, there it is. They're stopped here by the imperial forces. Now, initially, the well-trained Satsuma samurai are effective. They are able to fight and to win quite a few small battles. Eventually, they begin to lay siege to the castle at Kumamoto until modern weapons and the training of the imperial army is shown to be superior. So this, they defeat them and they retreat back to Shiroyama, which is a big hill in Kagoshima domain, prefecture. And this is where they have a very short and decisive loss, unfortunately. If you ever watched the movie The Last Samurai with Tom Cruise, there are sword-bearing samurai running and archers fighting against imperial army howitzers, right? And it's a very moving movie. You should definitely watch it. But that's not true. The real issue was that the artillery that they had, so the samurai from Satsuma, was just less advanced. It was in less good repair. It was not as effective as the imperial army's artillery. So the battle that eventually takes place was one in which the small numbers of the imperial army, but with the better weapons, defeated the much larger contingent from Satsuma domain, and it was they lost. Here we can see the Battle of Shiroyama as it was being fought, and depicted here. What you see here are the flags of the Japanese Empire, and this is called the Hinomaru. It will be the Imperial Japan's flag up until 1945. So we see it there. It's one of the first times that there's an imperial army to actually come together to fight a foe. In this case, it's actually an internal foe. So Japan's empire took shape because they were able to claim shipwrecked sailors from Ryukyu as Japanese, because they were able to quell the internal descent by force from Satsuma, which is at the very tip, as you recall, right, of Japan anyway, right? But also by their effort to incorporate what today is Hokkaido into Japan as well. So the Ainu people, who are the peoples who have lived in this northern island, and also for the north as well, in the Kuril Islands, are not of the same ethnicity as the Japanese peoples. They have a very different sort of history, different language, different practices, right? Different cultural practices. Now, as we discussed a little while ago, and also in other classes, there had been trade between the Ainu and the Japanese for a very long time. And the shogunate allowed this to continue by putting the Matsumae domain in charge of this relationship in the far north of Honshu. But as we get into the 1800s, right, this relationship becomes much more problematic for the Ainu. Japanese are very interested in resources, and we talked about copper being an important export item for Japan, and this has been the case since about 1600, and they've been finding and then increasingly mining these precious metals and other metals in what's called Ezo throughout the Edo period. But the Ainu are not actually mining people. They don't mine very much, right? They're mostly fisher folk and hunters. So it is when the Japanese begin to accelerate their efforts in that area that the relationship becomes the most problematic for the Ainu. So one thing that the Japanese introduce is the use of the gill net, which is a net, it's a net that is anchored and it is made to catch a lot of fish, basically, right? So the Ainu were not commercial fishers, they were just fishing and hunting for subsistence, and so this was a very different approach. The Japanese are increasingly fishing commercially, and this is going to deplete very quickly certain fishing zones around the coast of Hokkaido. The pound trap also will do this as well, which is where fish are chased into a really big net through a funneling system. And this, again, very work intensive, but also a very efficient way of catching fish. Is going to deplete the main food source for many of the Ainu peoples who cannot compete with us. They don't have this approach to fishing or the desire to do that. Or the technology to fish this way. So the 1800s is a century of enormous decline for fisheries and also therefore of starvation and suffering for the Ainu peoples, who are increasingly also faced with more and more Japanese going to explore or settle in Hokkaido, or it's called Ezo at this point in time. The Meiji government, very soon after it's founded, right, they established that this island of Ezo was actually part of Japan, and they officially colonize this territory. They send they create a colonial government with a member of the government who goes and who is there to oversee colonial development in Hokkaido. They call it as well Hokkaido from 1869. And they also divide the land up. And this is this is directly inspired by American policy against Native Americans in the United States. But this is an effort to weaken their hold on their land and property by recreating a system of classification. So they divide land up into parcels that then must be that in order to be claimed have to also appear on documents of ownership. And as you can imagine, Ainu do not have, for the most part, documents showing that they own land. They also work quite a bit on communal lands as well, which are shared, right? And obviously there's no deeds or those kind of things. So this imposition of this new system is one that is very much designed, like U.S. policy against Native Americans, to expropriate and then appropriate the lands from the peoples living there before. In this case, the Ainu. The last piece of this early phase, in that sort of this first decade or so of the Meiji government's imperial expansion, was their engagement with Korea. They were not able to send Saigo Takamori to Korea to basically be massacred in order to then justify Japan's expansion into Korea, but they have a different idea, and one inspired very much by the American arrival on their own shores. They send ships to Korea in 1876, and this they do so in a way that is going to necessarily provoke the Koreans to fire upon their ships, and then in retaliation, they fire upon the Korean battery, and then when the fighting, which is not very intense, I don't believe, but when it's done and they stop, the Japanese have shown that they are superior militarily at this point, and they force Korea to sign a treaty that opens Korea to trade with Japan and other imperial powers. Japan and other countries have often called Korea the hermit kingdom because they were not open to foreigners, they were not open to Christianity from Europeans who were in China, for example. They were closed and very sort of on purpose. This is going to change how Korea is going to interact with the rest of the world. So the signing of the Treaty of Ganghwa in 1876 is the sort of Commodore Perry moment for Korea, but it's Japan this time that is the imperial force arriving to open up the country. So in the Treaty of Ganghwa, Korea is given equal sovereign rights with Japan. And we'll go back to that in a second. Korea is going to open 3 ports to trade with Japan. Japanese will be able to settle in these ports. And therein they would have extraterritoriality. Does that kind of ring a bell a little bit? Japan is also going to send observers to the court, it's a monarchy, Korea, to help them modernize, right, the right way. And I also want to emphasize that this idea here of equal sovereignty, it might sound like Japan is trying to empower Korea. And perhaps you could find people who believed that at the time. But the real issue is that Japan is trying to pull Korea out from under China's dominance and influence, be able themselves to then take that role and to take resources from Korea and to then use those resources for its own benefit. So Korea and China, right? China, the long-term sort of neighbor and stronger sort of dynastic empire, a country next to Korea, and then the newer or more newly ambitious Japan, they are in a dispute over Korea from the very beginning, right? Japan wants to have Korea, has felt before to take it over. China is really struggling with lots of things, like from mostly sort of a lot of like Western issued things, but also its own internal issues. Korea might be a way to help address these issues. So we have a situation in which Japan's sort of foreign minister, for a short time, is Ito Hirobumi, and Li Hongjiang, who is the foreign minister, more or less, of the Qing Empire. They are exchanging letters about how all this should play out. China is worried that Japan will colonize Korea, and rightfully so. Meanwhile, in Korea, this country, it's a monarchy, and there is a very sharp hierarchy between, there's a sort of a slave class, and then there's a commoner class, and there's a very powerful but an elite class called the Yangban, who have the sort of scholarly official class, kind of like in China. But rule is apparently not going very well. People are not doing very well, and there's a lot of dissatisfaction with corruption, with poor governance in Korea. So, in that context, some people in this this upper class here, these elites, are looking for ways to try and like revamp their country, to make their country more powerful, and they see that perhaps Japan could be an ally in this, and they take the Treaty of Ganghwa as a starting point for perhaps a better future for Korea, and they even embrace it. And the Enlightenment Party in Korea, at least initially, is in favor of Japan coming in and trying to help Korea to modernize. So this is all happening at the same time. But the Li-Ito Convention is the conclusion of this discussion in which Japan and China both agree not to intervene directly right, in Korea without first telling the other that they're going to go intervene. So if things go badly, if there's an insurrection or rebellion or uprising in Korea, they've oftentimes asked China for help to send troops. This would commit China or Japan to notifying the other party before they send troops. The Dongguk Rebellion, it brews from 1864 or so on, but it really becomes a rebellion in 1894. It is a new religion in many senses, combining anti-Confucian thought. It's against the establishment in many ways. It is very in favor of Korean independence and identity as a country. And this peasant uprising that began actually with some people who failed to then become to access that highest level of civil service status in Korea becomes a several million person-wide national rebellion in 1894. And Korea, at this point, King Kojong, the king of Korea, reaches out for help to China, fearing for his life and also the integrity of his country. Japan asserts that China did not follow the terms of the agreement and notify Japan ahead of time before sending troops. Who knows, right? But in any case, troops are sent. The Chinese are successful in putting down most of the Dongguk uprising or rebellion, but then Japan and China go to war. And this is more or less the origin of the First Sino-Japanese War. And to skip ahead a little bit, this is a war that lasts for a year. Like many wars in East Asia, is largely fought in Korea, right? And at the cost of Korea, about Korea. And that ends, in this case, with Japan's victory. And victory of Japan was, as you can imagine, really a big deal, right? A small country, a country that did not have a very impressive military or a navy to speak of at all in the early 1860s, now had fought against undefeated China. And Western imagery, Japanese imagery, they all depict this impressive victory of a small country. It's a big country, and this is the first time that we see Western countries sort of looking at Japan very differently, thinking of it as perhaps an ally or a rival in the imperial theater, and not just another sort of powerless non-Western country. So Japan becomes the most advanced of the Eastern peoples in Western thinking, right, through this war. The war ends with a treaty that is signed between the country's leaders, and this treaty gives Korea independence. Again, we talked about what that means, right? But it's independent from China especially. It also stipulates that China cedes Taiwan, remember that the island that was not being properly governed, so the Japanese claimed, to Japan. China never really owned Taiwan in the first place, right? That's the fact that there were these Pawan peoples who attack sailors, I think, testifies to that point to begin with. But now it belongs to Japan, and now it's Japan's problem, perhaps. They also cede the Liaodong Peninsula, which is up here, part of what today we'll talk, what will become referred to as Manchuria, for Japan, and an area where a lot of fighting took place during this war. China gives Japan a huge indemnity, and they also open 4 treaty ports to Japan. So for the first time, China, which has been, if you'll recall, the Opium War, forced to have all of these foreign concessions, right, for these European powers who basically wanted to be able to sell opium in China. That led to them having these open ports. Japan now has become a country able itself to have these kinds of ports, also have extraterritoriality in these treaty ports. So that's happening. Japan's empire is growing through these steps. And I'll mention Taiwan briefly. Japan takes an active interest in Taiwan right away. They send their own governor general. They carry out a land survey census. They create a system not unlike the five-family systems in the Edo period of sort of local government. They create and they levy heavy taxes, and they also make schooling. They create a schooling system in Taiwan, but they make it Japanese language based. And they also create the Bank of Taiwan. They begin to use Taiwan as a rice colony, sending drawing rice from Taiwan to Japan or for Japanese soldiers overseas. And it's created, which is the Japanese Colonial Bank, which finances the creation of sort of a sugar empire and a rice empire, and tea and camphor to a smaller extent empire in Taiwan that really goes back to Japan. So Japan now can get rice from its rice colony. Taiwan. The roads, railways, and harbors are maintained by this new government, which connects people. The postal service, telegraph are also they're also installed, and so these changes, they dramatically change life for people living in Taiwan, and many actually embrace this. So what I'll say lastly is that when they defeat China, they're able to guarantee Korea's independence from China, and in theory from them as well, but that will go away. They procure Taiwan, and here you see where it says Dalian up there. That is the Liaodong Peninsula. They get a very large Chinese indemnity, and they open 4 treaty ports in mainland China. And then a very strange thing happens. Western countries were impressed by Japan defeating China, but they were also worried about what that would mean for the world order and their place in that world order. And one of the big goals of the United States and Great Britain was to, quote unquote, open China and leave it open so they could all trade with China. And Japan was actually taking pieces of China, Manchuria in this case, for themselves. And that was not a good thing. And so what we see is that Russia, Germany, United States, Great Britain, they basically all agree to intercede. Great Britain eventually sort of steps out of this four-country group, and and basically Germany and Russia are the leaders in this effort, but the U.S. is also involved, and they intervene. The U.S. steps out. Britain, at this point, stays part of this group. So there's 3 countries, Great Britain, Russia, and Germany, that are going to step back in and sort of try and restructure the balance after Japan's victories to make things as they should be. So Russia actually takes back they take the peninsula under their protection that Japan had been given after the end of the First Sino-Japanese War, and Shandong Peninsula, which is further down on the coast of China, is taken by Britain and Germany. So this was for Japan a very big slap in the face. They thought, we made it. We have fought a major country with modern technology. We've won it. In this war, there were not so many atrocities. We did a good job, and the West has seen us as equals, right? But over the course of those 4 years before 1900, this is shown not to be the case. And in this situation, in this context, Russia, which still sees Manchuria and Korea as an important area to develop, to get access to warm water ports, and if need be to attack Japan, Russia is going to develop very heavily in these areas. So they build the South Manchurian Railroad to bring people and materials from central and southern Russia all the way to the coast there. And they fortify Port Arthur as well, just to make sure that no one challenges their authority there. And they also begin actively seeking to sort of foment anti-Japanese sentiment in Korea. As we discussed before, Korea has been declared independent, but Russia is meddling. Things change a little bit, but I'll get to that in a second. Eventually, Great Britain will realize that Japan could be perhaps a partner, or at least a formidable opponent who they should negotiate with as opposed to an enemy, whereas Russia will stay in this antagonistic relationship with Japan. So as you may know from other classes, the situation gets much more complicated when millions of Boxers from sort of central China, who are unemployed, underfed, and who are also just really having a hard time with things like famine and flooding, but also all the Western new things that are appearing around them, missionaries, electricity. They basically they gather together and they decide to try and push out the Westerners of China in what is called the Boxer Rebellion. Eventually, they even have the Empress Dowager of China even gives them her support, partially because her troops are unable to put them down. So this rebellion of these Boxers who believe themselves impervious to bullets leads to a lot of damage, especially in the amongst Westerners in Japan, in China, and especially on the in Chinese treaty ports. And this brings the wrath of Western countries, who form an 8-country force to go and fire upon and then defeat the Boxers, who are not impervious to bullets, and then to impose on China a great amount of restrictions that will essentially make its future very doubtful. Looking at China afterwards, China never recovers from this this Boxer Protocol that is imposed upon them by Russia, Holland, Germany, UK, the US, France, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Italy, Spain, and Belgium. I'll just mention quickly that what happens, some things to highlight. Huge indemnity paid over 40 years. They're going to expand the guard of the foreign treaty port or legation in Beijing. But more importantly, perhaps, there can be no exams for the civil service in China. So those who run the government will not be able to get the training that they usually have and the qualifications that they typically have to lead. So already an understaffed Qing government is going to be even more understaffed, and this is part of why it will crumble. Also, no arms imports, so they can't defend themselves very well, and also some executions happen as well. So a big set of consequences happen there for China. What's important for us, though, is that Russia agrees to move their troops out of Manchuria, and that they are going to then be focusing on how they can still maintain their commercial, their enterprises and their sphere of influence in that area. So Great Britain, as I said before, has seen that Japan could be a problem, and they're willing to talk with Japan as opposed to leaving Japan on the other as an enemy. And so, and they're also worried about what Russia might do. Russia, their expansion is causing some concern, again, about the idea of an open China for Great Britain. And so they are going to ally with Japan in 1902. This is a big thing for Japan. A major Western power allies with Japan. The alliance basically says that, first of all, Japan has a special interest in Korea, which Great Britain recognizes, and that this should be not Korea, but Great Britain and Japan both understand that they have interest in China, and that they would like to both protect each other's interest in China. And they agree that if either of them gets into a war in East Asia against a single other country, that the other one will not interfere. So it's a strange kind of, it's sort of a wimpy alliance. Like I won't attack you if you and Russia are in a war, or if you and China are in a war. I won't help you, but I won't attack you either. If two powers are attacking the other one, however, the other will assist. And this is sort of Japan's first evidence of joining, in their view, the great powers. And this actually happens, right? There is a cause for concern. Even though Russia was supposed to take its troops out of Manchuria, they don't fully do that. They don't recognize Japan's special interest in Korea, and they continue to fan the flames of anti-Japanese sentiment in Korea. And there's no doubt that they want to have Korea as a colony or as a conduit for their country. And these are some of the things that eventually will lead to the Russo-Japanese War in 1904. There's argument over, the troops that are still left by Russia in Manchuria, and the Japanese who claim that Korea is independent still have troops there as well. So there's a lot of mistrust on both sides. There are a lot of small things that happen, but the first major attack is actually a surprise attack by the Japanese on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur. There you see the red dot. There was some fighting on land, and there were also a lot of fighting also by sea. And a long story sort of short is that this fight really results in a victory for the Japanese at sea, but on land it's really a stalemate. There's not really a clear winner in this conflict that lasts less than a year. But it is the Russians who eventually give up, right, and submit and concede. Here we can see the surrender of the Russian army at Liaoyang. So we just have to imagine a little bit what this means for Japan and what it means for Japan's image throughout the world, to be the victor against a major Western power. We can debate about how Western Russia is, but there's no doubt at this point in time, in 1905, Russia has a monarchy, Russia has a modern military, Russia has French-speaking aristocracy. It is, a Western country for this particular, in this context, right? So the images, right, of Japan fighting heroically against Russia, they are all over the newspapers in the U.S. and in Great Britain as well. And the arbiter, the figures who step in to oversee this treaty are led by Theodore Roosevelt, President Roosevelt of the United States, who sits between these two at Portsmouth in New Hampshire, and draws up the terms of the peace between these two great powers. Sorry, and here we can see Katsurataro and other Japanese, and then we see the Russians as well as they hammer out the details and end this war. This war is very important because it recognizes Japan's supremacy in Korea, not just interest, but actual supremacy, and that Russian holdings in Manchuria, as well as they may have had in Korea, go to Japan. Sakhalin Island, which is the far north of what today is Hokkaido, half of that goes to Japan. This is a big issue today, but I won't get into that. And then those great things are not complemented with any sort of an indemnity from Russia. So Russia gives all these things, but they don't actually give money to Japan, which causes, as you can imagine, a lot of problems. A great nation defeats another great nation. They should get a nice indemnity, but they don't. So just how welcome is Japan at this high level among great nations? Just food for thought. Last two slides I want to get through today. This war essentially is what begins the final phase of Korea's transformation into a Japanese colony. It paves the way. This treaty makes Korea a Japanese protectorate. So Japan is protecting the sovereignty of Korea, which is, it's horsewash, right? They're definitely going to want to take it over, but that's what they agreed to do. And that's why in 1910, they are the only ones on the ground to be able to carry out the annexation of Korea. So Korea becomes part of Japan in 1910 as a colony that becomes in part of the empire. Japan's special interest in Korea, they kept pushing for this, right? In all their negotiations with Western countries. Excuse me. But it's only in 1905, after defeating Russia, that Japan gets the right to make Korea into a protectorate. This is a term that you may have heard before. It might be a term that you may hear about now in thinking about Palestine, right? This is a very tried and true way for colonial powers to exercise authority without calling the country that they're taking over a colony. So this protectorate is established in theory for the benefit of Koreans because they need to be kept independent from all of these potential foreign countries that are going to kind of take them over in 1905. But as everyone, I think, in the Western media and governments knew, this was a prelude to annexation. So in 1910, Japan officially annexes Korea. And this is Japan's second overseas colony. I mean, I guess Okinawa is, but they were tied together in many ways. But Taiwan is further away than Okinawa, and Korea was culturally, right, in many ways also further away from Japan than its earlier colonies. This is going to make Japan it gives Japan a continental foothold. And from this point on, Japan will become not just a rice colony like Taiwan, which mostly was about resources, but also a population colony to sort of take some of the pressure valve release, right, from Japan's population pressure to the continent. And we'll see, as this is happening as well, Manchuria is being leased and developed by Japan. People are moving there for, slowly but surely into Manchuria as well, but it won't become a colony for a long time after this. But it's happening very slowly. So we talk about Japan's colonization of Korea in three phases. The first phase is the phase of military rule, in which there was relatively harsh governance, coercion, or the threat of force, if not. There was a governor general, the first governor general of Korea was Ito Hirobumi. So we see him again, right, in that role as well. And we see that Japanese police are sent and then also are expanded. Their authority is quite strong in Korea to maintain law and order. And then they encourage Japanese immigration. So we see a rush of Japanese immigration to Korea almost right away in 1910. 1919 is an interesting year. It's the end of this period of military rule, and I'll talk about why in a second. I guess I should do that now. So as you have probably heard about in other classes, history classes, the end of World War I brought about sort of like a global reckoning of the cost of war. It didn't last long, but it brought this about. And also brought about like a discussion of how to avoid wars like this in the future. It also brought the US president, Woodrow Wilson, and his 14 points to a large global audience in which basically he urged countries to be able to practice self-determination so that they should be able to decide if they should be free or not. And of course, the hypocrisy of this statement for the United States at this point is, it's blinding. But he says this, and he kind of means it besides in America's backyard. And countries hear this, and they want to be able to then apply it themselves. There also, so there is at the Treaty of Versailles in France, there is the end of the war comes about, and a discussion about how to make these 14 points work. They are discussed. Korea sends delegates to go and explain why Korea is actually its own country. It shouldn't be a colony of Japan. And they weren't allowed to actually enter to present these arguments, and they have to go back. So the 14 points don't apply to Korea, to put that very simply. And in response, the people of Korea, they also riot.